All right, Cameron. Well, those are some really loud strings. I'm wondering if you have strings turned up in your mock-up. Maybe you were having problems hearing them in some passages, and you were scoring this, and you were listening to the mock-up, and just wanted some reference, and you turned up the strings, and then you forgot to turn them down when you exported the mock-up. But wow, they sound really strong towards the end there. I mean, there are a few things built in, which I'll comment on as we go along, like you've got a crescendo into a passage from fortissimo, and then you don't correct it at the beginning, and the strings are essentially playing triple F at that point. Okay, well, I am just going to completely ignore the mock-up on this, which I kind of do anyways, but I like to include it for reference just to see what the composer is thinking. Now, here you're saying non divisi, and you're throwing in these G natural slash F double sharp notes at the bottom, and that's kind of fun. Okay, so like what you're asking for is a ba-bum kind of a thing, and it's fast enough and it's hitting hard enough to where you don't need to separate out these pitches. You could almost you could you could almost you could almost score this as like a big quadruple stop, because you're going to get a similar effect, right, of the kind of brokenness of it, as the bow sort of rips across the strings. But I mean, it's okay as it is. It just is a little unsettling. Because the triple stop is already broken, right? Is already suggests the presence of some kind of grace note or some kind of roll. So I'm going to talk about a few sort of peculiarities, a few things to watch out for in your scoring, and so on. A few things that possibly need a little bit of work, and then and some balance problems and so on, and then we'll apply the evaluation criteria to this. It's funny, I always end up having to rearrange my desk, and then I end up strangely feeling the need to tell you about it, though you probably don't really give a damn. So it makes this big clunking sound. Okay, so let's just start off with the role of the harp. Okay, so I've mentioned in previous evaluations that really, like, the only thing that the harp can contribute to a massive tutti like this is like a big rolled chord, and that is provided that the tutti isn't just screamingly loud, right? So in this case, that is what we've got. We've got a screamingly loud tutti here. And I just feel that there's no chance for even a bigger, louder roll from the harp. It just has no chance in there to really say anything meaningful. Going on here, you are reducing the volume a little bit, but since the harp is essentially playing the same exact thing as the pizzicato violins, they're just it has really no chance of being heard for its own sake. So I would say just save the harp for moments in which it really can be heard. And it might be fun for the harpist to play this along with the orchestra, and they've got the best seat in the house for that kind of balance, but nobody sitting 10 feet away from them will be able to hear them, let alone the audience. So let's apply the evaluation criteria to this. All right. So just in general, like, it's a really active, really aggressive, really fun way of interpreting the music. I think you missed a change in the bass right in here, and then later on you sort of put it in. But yeah, it's sort of like, by hanging on that E in the bass, it kind of takes away from the original meaning of the music to my, to my eyes. One other thing, before I go too much into the evaluation criteria, is the other thing that I noticed, and that I forgot to mention, was that you are sort of, you've got this cross voicing in here with your piccolo slurring down to B, which is B above the staff for the flute. And then you have your first flute slurring up into this G sharp. So what you're doing here is great for the first flute. They are in their element. That's a beautiful, bright note for them. However, this is not a bright, loud note for the piccolo at all, right? So piccolo has the same exact challenges to the clarity of its registers and the strength of its registers as a standard C flute in terms of the written range, right? So B is a sort of a medium soft note, and it will not stand out from the texture. And sort of to make matters worse, like you're doubling it with E flat clarinet. So the E flat clarinet will completely eclipse anything that the piccolo is trying to do here. It just will be inaudible. So yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that it doesn't work, but it's just the piccolo is just, it doesn't work for the piccolo player. The orchestration is very, very cool. It's very big and blustery and very, very fun. Here I would score your clarinets differently, even if you are, you're sort of thinking about the different functions of the instruments and how they work together and stuff. No conductor that I know of is going to want to read the E flat clarinet between the first and the two B flat clarinet parts. This is really going to be considered as the first clarinet and the second clarinet, and then the third clarinetist is going to be playing the E flat anyways. So if you had three clarinetists available, the third would be playing the E flat, and the second would be playing the B flat. So that would have to be flipped anyways, but it's really better to put the E flat over the B flat, right? Just in terms of like the pitch of the instruments, and then to have I'm actually looking at this this B flat part, and I'm thinking that they could have, like, you're going to huge trouble about doubling up your flutes here, and the first and, as you call it, third clarinets right in here are, have almost no hassle at all to playing together. You just maybe just drop down to one period right here, just to say, like writing in that it's first clarinet only, and then then going back to octaves right in here. So yeah, I mean it's just a little funky in that scoring. Okay. So let's talk about the evaluation criteria finally. Sorry about I keep doing these little sidetracks and detours and stuff. Once again, I'm having a really early start this morning because of possible construction later today. It should be done soon. They were going to come yesterday, but then we sort of got rained out. So hopefully they'll be back today. All right. So the concern of the evaluation criteria, they're sort of merciless. They're sort of mercilessly asking that, in the first place, that these sections are easily distinguishable from one another, so that there isn't too much of a copy-paste kind of a thing going on. And you do have some variation here and there, but it's still it's still kind of the same thing twice. Now, I mean, I don't know if that is a weakness, but it's a goal that I set for myself, that if I came back to it, then I would change it in some way. In my case, it was to magnify it, right? But you're already starting from a position of just kind of ultimate strength, right? And so just, the assumption is that the listener will want to listen to exactly the same thing twice, right? So So if you're correct in that assumption, then there's nothing wrong with what you did here, right? But that's where I would say, like, if you're going to polish this up and work on it a little bit more, Cameron, that you might want to think about ideas like progressing a texture, right? Maybe the beginning could be a little less incredibly huge, and then it could be more incredibly huge later, or there could be some way that you could vary things a little bit, not hugely, but just enough to feel like it was kind of going somewhere rather than just repeating, right? Okay, and then we come to the next concern of melodic development going quite high, and you have made compensations. I kind of like all the doubling and so on in here. It's really nice. It's kind of strange that your E-flat clarinet sort of jumps down like this. Yeah, I mean, you'd think that the E-flat clarinet would want to be like kind of more higher positioned compared to some other choices that could be made. But anyway, it's fine. It works. It works all right. And then, of course, right in here, you also do certain compensations. Some instruments dropping down to pick up the octave below, and then some just going completely nuts and just awesomely going for it. So yeah, so divisi right in here. You're really setting up quite a wide octave there. It kind of makes me wonder whether or not the viola could be doing the second violin's job, and the second violin could be doing the lower divisi first violin's job, and then you just leave your cellos to do what they're doing, and maybe the basses could come in here, and that way you have more individual strength in each group. I mean, not to say that your strings aren't strong enough already. They're pretty strong, at least in the mix. Yeah. I mean, you have all of these little, like, compensations and little, like... Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure that it has to be quite so taken apart. Do you know what I mean? Like for instance, all three of your bassoons could be starting from right around here, right? Or they could even be starting from even lower, right? They're bassoons; they can go quite low if you want them to. So as far as the accompaniment figures, covering a wide range, yeah, I mean, the way that you got this all divided here, what's wrong with? See, like here you're having like first bassoon play this and then second bassoon play that. What if you had a second bassoon go bump bump bum, and you had your first bassoon going bum bum bum? Do you see what I'm saying? So if you just trade it off between the parts, then you have each instrument in a narrower register that they are being asked to play, and they can nail those notes with the best possible intonation. Right? That's part of the concern of by making things easier on the player, then they can focus all of their attention on certain basic aspects of playing. One of which is just getting beautiful articulation and sound and so on and so forth. Like the more fussy, the more far-reaching the accompaniment, sometimes the less the player can focus exactly on the perfection that they've been working on their entire lives, right? And that's something that a lot of times we don't quite grasp as orchestrators, is their perspective of trying to deliver to you the absolute best sound they can, right? And when things are kind of scattered all over their registers and stuff, rather than just easy trade-offs between two different players, then I just feel that we're missing an opportunity. And this pizzicato is all really nicely scored. I think you're missing an opportunity here. You're doubling some pitches in your violas, like taking it up an octave and so on from the bassoons. and then some pitches here in the cellos and so on. You could have doubled some of those pitches as well in your oboe family instruments, and just made it more precise and more punctuated. You do that here, which is really, really cool. So, why can't you do it here? All right. It's just a really massive, massive melodic texture right in here. And, I mean, that is your whole approach here, is to be as out there and to be as powerful as possible. So that's fine. That's the approach that you're taking. It really has kind of more the character of a band score than just a strictly symphonic kind of a score, right? So much of the primary functions are in the winds and the brass, and they're very, very prominent. In the way that this is scored, they're just really going to push out of the texture. That said, I don't think you need to mark down your brass. I think that it's all of a piece, this kind of massive fortissimo scoring. So, I mean, if the brass were to take it literally, they would definitely outplay everybody else. But I think the connotation of this will be enough that everybody will find their slot without outplaying anybody else if they're really paying attention and they're being a good orchestra member. So, this might seem a little strange at first, but I really kind of like the idea of the horns 1 and 2 playing in octaves together, and then the 3 and 4 kind of playing a lot of unison right here in the middle. I think that works fine. I don't think you have to worry about, just thinking purely in terms of pitch, of like a vertical pitch. Like, if you were to be slavish to it, your first part would be on top, and then your second part, excuse me, your third part would be on this B, and then, that maybe you would even end up with your fourth player on the bottom, right? But there's no need to do that. Really, just thinking of the horns working in pairs in ways that really help each other out. Nailing octaves beautifully in this kind of scoring, that really is first and second kind of scoring. All right, and I like the horns coming in to supplement the accompaniment. But of course, once again, the harp is just going to be completely overwhelmed. It's out of its league. Okay, so here we have a few change arounds. So here you're asking the E flat clarinet to go to B flat clarinet, and then you're asking the B flat clarinet to go to bass clarinet. So if you are just being realistic about it, this being the second clarinet and this being the third clarinet player, then you just have your E flat clarinetist go to the bass clarinet, and you leave your second B flat clarinet alone, right? So see how that, just like the practicality of it, solves the problem of how to apportion the parts. And you're sending your third bassoonist to contrabassoon. That's all good. All right, so here you're just sending your violinist way up to that screaming high D. And once again, we have the whole issue of like whether or not something is really musical, right? So playing fortissimo, doing a huge run all the way up to that high E, I mean, it is totally possible for a good pro player, but how musical is it? How beautiful of a sound will that be? Or will it be screechy, or will it be just beautifully refined and will it really fulfill what you've got in your imagination? And you probably noticed in a lot of scores, including mine, the violinists jump down so that they end up on this E, and they just allow the overtones to do the work of filling in the illusion that the violinists have run all the way up to this high E, sounding an octave higher. All right, and then we're going to the next section. This is all really nicely scored, and I think it really ticks a lot of the boxes of my of my other evaluation criteria, the upper middle register possibly being relentless if the pitch weight was in the upper middle register of the orchestra for the entire passage. So that's not an issue here, and it's not even an issue in this passage itself. And then the sense of maintaining a driving staccato and transitioning smoothly into the next passage, that's all, you tick those boxes perfectly fine. However, B is supposed to be right here, right? One thing, I'm just to, for anybody out there who's watching this, and Cameron as well, please don't change the position of the rehearsal marks. Now, I know very well that this is the beginning of the B section, but the more people who send me in scores, the more difficult things become for me to process everything and to have all my ducks in a row for every evaluation. And the way that you make things easy for me is to maintain where the rehearsal marks are. Okay, I think I'm going to put that on the checklist too. I'm going to be making a checklist of things to proofread on your score before sending me the entry. Yeah, and that's just one of them. It just makes my life easier if you don't mess with the position of where the rehearsal marks go, and that is where the rehearsal mark goes for this entry, or excuse me, for this challenge. So the B section. So now here we get into that problem that I was talking about before. Fortissimo, crescendo, no diminuendo, no restatement of the dynamics. What does that mean? That means that right in here the strings are triple F, right? They are triple F, and there's kind of really no way to hear anything else in this passage, especially with the mix, the way that you've got it with your strings boosted anyways. Now, in a realistic situation, even with the strings playing, triple F or whatever, you would still hear some of the brass right in here. But there's really kind of, you can't hear the harp at all. Now, with this, I would say, if you really want your harp to come through and to contribute to what's going on in the strings, here's what you need to do. Fortissimo, crescendo, and what was the marking that I added here? Was parentheses forte poco, right? So which translates to orchestra as like, say, like mezzo forte, say, right? So let's say that you had the crescendo, then diminuendo here, right, to a mezzo forte, right? And then at mezzo forte, add a bigger harp roll here, had bigger harp rolls, and then the harp is perfectly nice, is nicely scored. That's exactly the kind of thing that you could do. However, when you start adding brass into it, you smother the significance of the harp. I would say choose one or the other. If you want emphasis from harp, then score harp, leave out the brass. If you want emphasis from brass, score brass in there and leave out the harp, because or boost the harp to another octave. Make it much, much higher, and a nice big generous roll, and then you can have both, right? But they're just working against each other at this point, and the harp is the one that always loses. And yeah, this is all fine. There is part of the criteria of this, contrast of color, breadth of texture, and middle register scoring. We're going to see how that is realized further along. Maintaining differentiated roles and closely spaced melodies and overlapping accompaniment figures. There's really not a lot you can do about this because you're scoring everything for strings, right? So it's, highlighting the inner voices. You can't really do that because it's all strings. But we'll see how we go later on, right? And then this is all nicely scored. And here you are scoring for both sets of violins, and so that's a nice strong sound. We've got our protruding, our high interjecting notes. How to keep them from sounding too glaringly repetitive? I would say, you're onto something here, but just these sort of strong beeps and stuff, maybe that's where the harp could roll more rather than just go chord, right? So maybe a higher roll, and yeah, but then you just have to ask yourself, are these high E's standing out too much from the texture. It's just a choice everybody's got to make. I didn't feel that it was such a problem here, but it was hard to tell from your mock-up as well. Like it would be hard for you to judge because, because the strings were so strong once again. And now we're getting to and here just the harp has got no chance. You're marking fortissimo for your winds, and if we also assume that this is fortissimo for the strings, like we're seeing fortissimo marked right in there, it's really not clear. Maybe at the beginning of the phrase, make sure that you have got your dynamics marked across, especially on a page turn like this, the conductor is going to be looking at and think, oh, what do the strings have on their parts? They might want to know. But assuming that everybody's playing fortissimo here, once again, the harp has got no chance, right? If the harp were playing glissandos, if the harp were playing like icy high loud figuration, they might have a chance, except they kind of don't have a chance because of the timpani. Like anytime you're throwing in trombone, tubas, timpani, another feature that you don't have here, but like could possibly be a problem is like trumpet, right? Or xylophone. Xylophone absorbs the sound of high figuration from the harp, so that wouldn't work. So glissandos would be about the only thing that you could add here for the harp that would make any sense. Now, going forward, like here's when to bring in the harp and to not assume that the harp needs to be at the same level as everybody else, right? If you really want the harp to be louder, then you have to feature it in a certain way in this kind of scoring, right? So mezzo piano, and this should be marked forte, right? Right, so that the harp has got a chance to come through here. All right, so we have answered the whole question right here of contrast of color and breadth of texture, right? You just really have addressed that really nicely here. Now, keeping the triplets from overwhelming the melodic line, the problem here is that it's really hard to judge from your mock-up. Like, so if you were thinking, oh, I hope those triplets aren't too loud, they might actually be fairly loud. You've also got like clarinet octaves in here, stacked with bassoon octaves, and that is a very accordion-like sound. Speaking of accordions, and then especially with the oboe on the top, right? So accordion-like or organ-like, right? You're just kind of stacking those octaves in that way, very, very strong in the middle. So the way to tame that sound would be to add some strings in there, but like you are already using all of your strings right in here. So in a very, very a very, very forceful way. And that is very, very cool. Kind of stating the melody as this harmonized, this sort of chorale right in here. And so that is not enough to compensate for the kind of the stacking, the harmonic stacking that you're going to get from these low wind octaves. Okay, but I mean, it's still. So that happens a lot in Russian music. It's just a taste. It's like if that is to your taste, then it's perfectly fine. Another way to vary it would be to throw in some horn, right? So if you had horn as part of your middle voice, like you've got a triple octave. So if there was horn sitting in the middle, then that would that interrupts the kind of perfect lining up of harmonies above from the winds. Now. We have that concern as well of the widely reaching left hand patterns. This is all totally possible on contrabassoon, and we've got that same thing going on here. Sort of certain parts doubled by our double basses. I don't know if it's. I'm just looking at this, like, is it really necessary to break this up divisi to make it easier on the players? It's creditable that you want to do this, but I don't think that there's anything all that difficult about going E, B, E, then open E string below, right? So that's really, really simple. And then here, you have an open D string, right? So, like, some bassists are not going to be able to hit the low D. There will be like a change here to they might adjust their extension, their C extension, or they might just reach over to the fifth string, hit the pluck the low D, then pluck the open D over on the next string above, and then finger that B up there, right? So that's a little weird, it's a little fiddly, but it's totally possible. And then all this other stuff you could just have being played by all the basses. You don't really need to go divisi there. Okay. But I think it's really cool that you were sort of doubling that from above by your bass clarinets. That's all real fun. And then contrabassoon as well, and timpani. So I think it's all just really fun. I think it works really nicely, and I like the ba ba bum coming in here with your horns and your winds. I think supporting that's a really lovely inflation right in there. And then the same thing here, but then dwindling down. Here I would say don't do this. Like here you've got mezzo forte, and then you go mezzo forte to mezzo piano. Don't do that, just because like this is going to be forte anyways, right? So just make everybody forte, and then go down to mezzo piano. And then you have got a much better melodic curve there. Because, mezzo forte to mezzo piano is like blah to blah. You know what I mean? It's not that much of a change. So, you want an arc here. You want emphasis and then letting go, right? And this is all fine. This is all real fun. I like that, just like hitting those low tuba E's. Really, really fun. Yeah, I mean, I think that this works really, really well. About the only thing that I wonder with this passage is whether or not there could have been some kind of doubling of the strings right in here. I mean, they're beautiful on their own, but like you got some horns that kind of aren't doing anything, and I'm wondering if the horns, like if you had horns in the background, say this is like fortissimo. Let's say you had some horns in mezzo forte, just kind of backing up the strings here and adding some color, and then coming out of the texture, playing this fortissimo, and then fading back to being in the background. I think that would be really effective and a great way of just adding depth and color and weight to the strings right in here when there's all this other stuff going on. Now that might sound crazy for people listening to the mock-up and hearing how powerful the strings were here, but that's just the mixing of the mock-up. It has nothing to do with reality. All right, in real life, the strings will be at a disadvantage here with everything else going on around them. And in terms of keeping textural contours fresh, not too much the same, you're doing that subtractively, right? So I think that works pretty well too. So really just a satisfying entry. I really, really enjoyed looking at it. So many great ideas, such huge scoring. And I mean, I'm hoping that some of my suggestions will seem useful, and there might be some even better ideas that you come up with after having heard my suggestions. You might think, oh, Thomas has got a point, but I think my new idea is even better than that. And that's actually what I'm more hoping for sometimes with these evaluations, rather than everybody just following my advice. People like hearing the feedback and then coming up with even better ideas of their own. That's really my biggest preference, because, I'm not out here to make carbon copies of myself. I'm out here to find the individuality and uniqueness of everybody out there who is following this passion of orchestration and composition. So thank you so much, Cameron, for a very stimulating entry, and just something really to get me on my toes, and just really, really looking at things and thinking about massive textures and so on. And almost sometimes more than I can put into words in half an hour's time. So hope that it's been constructive. Thank you so much for this. Thanks for your support on Patreon and for helping the channel stay in the air. It really, really matters a lot. Thank you to all my Patreon supporters and to all the viewers out there who are keeping things alive with, with likes, with comments, with views, sharing this around to new possible viewers, and helping everybody get better with advice and thoughts and just being there. I appreciate it all. Thanks so much. And now, I'm going to look at the next entry.